part. Got some couple Detroit people there? Yeah? Okay, there you go. I come as also a part of you, for I am an extension of Grace College, because I'll be working with Grace College Detroit in the fall. Woo! Do you guys know that there's a Grace College Detroit? You guys know that? Okay. A few of you, good. Yeah, a couple years ago it started. I know the director, and he asked me to be a part of the Biblical Studies team program, so I'm going to be teaching there. Really excited about it. I believe in the vision of what Grace College is about, and I'm excited to be here this morning. I want to share a story with you. It was an ordinary day that God used to alter my life drastically. And that's how I see God work often, is he takes the ordinary moments of our lives and he makes them extraordinary. He allows us to meet someone or puts us in a situation where we have to trust in him and move in a different direction than we were going before. So in the fall of 2006, in Chicago, Illinois, I met a guy named Daniel who worked at World Relief, a refugee resettlement agency. To be honest, I didn't know anything about refugees. Now, we hear it all the time, right? And there's a lot of opinions and a lot of issues going on with that. Back then, I had no idea. I'm like, oh, what? Okay, and he said, well, how about you come along with me to visit a family? They just arrived from Africa, and they're here. They've only been here a couple days. Would you like to meet them? And we're going to give them some furniture or give them some household items. And I said, okay. Now, in 2005, my wife and I moved to Chicago to start a church. I was a church planter, and we started this church, and we were living in a neighborhood called Albany Park. Here's a picture of the neighborhood. Northwest side of the city, about 2 square miles, 100 different ethnicities. The public school in my neighborhood had 60 different languages spoken in it. That's different languages. And it was a neighborhood that was filled with drugs and gang violence and all sorts of social issues, impoverishment, you name it. And I was praying, I was asking God to show me how in the world could I start making a difference in this neighborhood? How could I possibly move into this chaos and hopelessness and offer the good news of Jesus? What does that look like? And then I met Daniel at World Relief, and he invited me to come along with him. So I said, sure, I'll come. So I remember getting into the van, and it was a broken down, rickety old van. I could literally see the pavement underneath me. It was like a big old hole. I'm like, oh, okay, got to get a new van here, buddy. And we were driving to the apartment building, the apartment complex where this family was. It's in my neighborhood, so I knew it well, the area. We got out, we unloaded this coffee table, small coffee table, and put some other household items on it, some cups and mugs and plates or whatever. And we went up three flights of stairs to the apartment. Daniel knocked on the door, and this woman greeted us, and she was so happy. Just beautiful smile. And she said in a very broken English, come in, come in. She then had us sit down on the couch where the family room was, and her husband was there, and she had 4 children. 2 of them were, I think, sleeping, so 2 were out in the living room. And then another man came who was the interpreter, which was good because they didn't speak any English. They were only been there a few days. And they had us sit down in a specific spot. They said, you have to sit here. This is the place for guests. You must sit here. And I remember just being struck by how simple it was. They had hardly anything, maybe a couple chairs, a couple dishes. And next thing I know, the lady is bringing out all this food. Bread and chicken and lamb, and all this extravagant food that, I'm thinking, wow, they've only been here a couple days and they're serving us like kings. And then the translator said, excuse me, the family would like to say something to you, and I'm going to interpret. I said, okay, great. And so we sat there, and the family began to share their story, and they started to tear up. They started to cry. And they said, we want to thank you for bringing us to America. And I'm thinking, I don't know anything about this. I'm just tagging along, And Daniel was talking, the worker of World Relief was talking to them. And she said, no, I want to thank you because we had prayed and hoped that God would make it a way for us to come to America so we could have hope. Our children could have education. And they started to tell their story. They lived in Sudan, in Africa, in a simple village, when some extremists came through their village and started to terrorize and threaten them. They were forced to leave their area, and they traveled for a couple months, if I remember correctly, by bus, walking, until they reached Cairo, Egypt. When they reached Cairo, they were placed into a refugee camp with about 6,000 to 8,000 other Sudanese refugees. And they said it was a horrible experience because we were treated like animals. People would randomly come and steal our things. We had hardly any food. Soldiers would come in and with machine guns and threaten us. People were shot and killed. We had no idea if we were going to make it the next day or not. After a few years, we got the news that we were accepted to come, randomly chosen to come to America as refugees. And they're sharing the story and they're crying and I'm starting to cry, it's like, and at that moment, God spoke to my heart. I didn't hear an audible voice. It wasn't like that. It was just that still quiet voice right in my spirit. And God spoke and said, Dave, this is why you are here. This is why you're here. For people like this. People that are broken. People that are displaced. People that need someone that would just love them and be compassionate to them. See, I had been praying, what is it that you have me to do, God? We were raising support. We were trying to figure out, we couldn't afford a building because Chicago is very expensive, so we were looking how can we meet? We met in our home for a while and all this stuff. And I remember God spoke to me so clear, this is why you're here. A couple months later, I started volunteering with World Relief. A couple months after that, I started working for World Relief, which is great. I was bivocational because I was raising support and then I had to make some income on the side. So I'm working for World Relief and I'm meeting all these people from all over the world, from some of the most dangerous places in the world, like Sudan, in Iraq, Myanmar. And then others came later on, Bhutanese, Nepali, you name it, all these people, and they all came with stories. And part of my job was to listen. I was an adjustment counselor, so I would listen to them as they struggled with how do I adjust to a new environment? How do I learn English? How do I get employment? How do I pay my bills? People had come from refugee camps. They never had to pay bills. They never paid rent before, right? And so I would listen to them, help them as best I could to come up with a plan. So this morning I want to share with you two main ideas. Number one is what I call a theology of displacement. That is a biblical understanding of displacement. And number two is a response to displacement. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you the issue of how you should think or how you should view this issue of refugees. It's a loaded issue, right? It is, and there's a lot of opinions out there. Of course, the news and the media, a lot of political rhetoric is going on. We hear all these sides. Back when I was into this, nobody knew what refugees were. They were like, what? Now it's all over the place. But my hope is this morning to give you two ideas, and that is to give you an understanding, biblically speaking, of what displacement looks like, and then how do we respond. Let me just say this. Displacement comes in various sizes. Okay, in different degrees. A refugee is a literal displaced person, meaning someone that has been forced out by an external force to leave their country of origin. Most likely war, some kind of threat, some kind of political issue, religious issue, and they're forced out. They're no longer safe, and they have to relocate, oftentimes to a refugee camp or a neighboring country. Okay? But displacement has more than that. Displacement has the idea of being out of joint. Not fitting in. Anybody ever not fit in here? Anybody ever been overlooked? Nobody? Anybody felt like they haven't been accepted? Or they don't have that sense of belonging? That is displacement. We can all relate to displacement. Think about when you were in grade school and you didn't get picked at recess to play on the team. Or you were picked last. Or you weren't picked at the dance. Someone picked someone else. Or maybe you were overlooked in your family. Your sibling got the attention or whatever. Maybe you were rejected in a relationship. Misunderstood. You see, this is all a part of displacement. We understand this because we've been there, right? As human beings, we want to be valued. We want to be known. We want belonging. We want meaning. We want a sense of identity. And displacement is that painful reminder that we don't fit in, that we're oftentimes overlooked or not accepted from a cultural standpoint or in the world standpoint. And it can be painful. But here's the point. God is at work in displacement. That is, he pushes us, if you will, out of our comfort zone, the ruts that we fall into as human beings. We all fall into ruts, routines. He pushes us out of that so that we will trust him, so that we'll take that step of faith, whatever that step looks like, so that we feel uncomfortable and we're like, what do I do? And we cry out to God. That is the gift of displacement, the blessing of it. We need it. We need to feel that sense that we're not okay and the world around us is not okay, because it pushes us, at least it should, to trust God more, to walk by faith more. So let's look at a theology of displacement for a moment. Just a couple things here. Number one is God's people have always been a displaced people. Peter, for example, starts off his letter, 1 Peter 1, with this. He says, to the exiles or strangers of the dispersion. That is, the believers that are dispersed throughout the Roman Empire. Now, why would he use that word? He's trying to capture the identity, right, of what God's people are. The word in the original language of Greek means this: a resident foreigner, someone sojourning in a strange place, someone who is away from one's own people or place. Now, interesting, it does not mean one who is traveling through. It means someone who is settled down or next to or alongside of the native people. So, for example, in Jeremiah, there was an exile that took place. God's people were forced out, so they were displaced, forced out of Jerusalem, and now they're in Babylon. And they're living on the outskirts, kind of in a little bubble. Sometimes we do that, don't we, as Christians? We want to kind of isolate ourselves. We live in a bubble. They lived in this kind of on the outskirts, and God, through the prophet Jeremiah, writes them a letter and says, hey, guys, listen, you're going to be here for a while, 70 years, in fact. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to move into the city. I want you to move with the people. I want you to assimilate. I want you to plant gardens and have children, and I want you to seek the shalom, the peace, the flourishing of the city to which I've called you to. He says, to which I have called you to. What is he saying? He's saying, you don't fit in here. You're not to be like the people because they were not following God's ways, but you are to make a difference. You are strangers, but you are to be strangers that live on purpose, that offer value and offer meaning and bring to them my glory. Abraham also was one who was called out of his native land, so he was displaced, to follow God to a strange country, to a new country, to Canaan. God said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lead you. Well, what does that mean? Just follow me. So he's living in tents as he's traveling to this land. You see, God's people always have been displaced. Maybe geographically, or maybe just internally. We know that we don't fit into this world system. We don't fit in. At least we shouldn't. We're called to be salt, to bring flavor to the culture around us. We're called to be light. We're called to be set apart, to be different. We are displaced. But there's purpose in that. We're called to make a difference. We're called to bring joy and hope amongst that. Number two is God's people are never meant to mistake in this world for their true home. An interesting thing occurred when I started working at World Relief, refugee resettlement organization. I worked with my clients, and the whole point was to help them to adjust. I was an adjustment counselor. So we were helping them adjust. That means learn English. They had to go into our ESL program, our English program. They had to become employable. The adults, they would have to, learn how to put together a resume, learn how to work. Some of them had never had work experience before. I had one client from Burundi, Africa, who lived in a refugee camp for 36 years. He came at the age of 60. 36 years, never had any employment skills at all. That was hard. We got him a job at Chicago O'Hare Airport at a restaurant. It was the greatest day of his life. You should have saw him when he came into the office. He was beaming. I got a job. Now I can provide for my family. It was beautiful. So we were helping people adjust. But a thing I noticed would happen after about 6 months or so, maybe a little bit longer, My clients would tell me, listen, we love America because now we're free. We can do things here that we couldn't do back home. But we long for our true country. We will never forget it. Maybe we can never go back. Some of my clients said they could probably never go back, or they would never go back because how dangerous it would be to return. But it will always stay within us. We long for it. We hope one day there will be peace. We hope that one day our children can go and see the land of their birth. And that struck me because you know what? As Christians, we have a longing for a place that we've never seen. We read about it in the scriptures, maybe hear a sermon about it, but we don't know, we don't comprehend, and yet we feel it, don't we? We get little glimpses of Eden here and there, maybe through the sound of a child's laughter, or through a warm, affectionate touch, a hug, or someone that offers something kind to us, or just a situation that you feel like, oh, this is right. This is a little taste of heaven. And they're little tastes. They're not lingering tastes because we live in a fallen world. And yet our soul longs for that perfection, that completion. And that's promised to us. Jesus said to his disciples on his last night when he was betrayed, he said to them, listen, I have to leave you. Well, what? What do you mean? I have to go away. I'm going to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house, there are many rooms, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. And I'll come back and I'll bring you with me. You see, the opposite of displacement is placement. Placement is that sense of place, that sense of belonging, that sense of completeness. Now, we have here and now in this world partial placement. That is in God's family. The invitation is given for us to come and be God's children. But the ultimate placement is ahead of us. Listen to what Hebrews says. They admitted, that is the people of God, they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. And they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one, as it goes on to say. And therefore, God is not ashamed to call them his people because he has prepared a city for them. You see, God's people are people who need to remember and long for their true country of origin. And that struck me when I started working with refugees because they never forgot where they came from. And let me say, we can't either. Our true identity. We cannot forget what our true origin is. Paul says that we are citizens of heaven. That is right now. We are not of this world in the sense. We're here, planted here to make a difference, to live our lives and be effective, but our citizenship, our identity is with Christ. And so you know what God does is he allows things to happen to us that cause us to kind of activate that longing, if you will. I call it the inner ache. We all have this sense, this inside sense that things aren't right in the world, that things aren't right within us, right? And we feel it most profoundly when we're disappointed, most profoundly when we're rejected, or when things don't work out the way you hope, right? You have a certain plan. So those of you that are planners out there, I'm a planner, so I know. You have a certain plan, a certain idea, and it doesn't go the way you thought. And what do you feel? You feel that ache, that man, why is it so hard? Why is some days such a struggle to get out of bed? Because we feel that ache. And God allows us to feel it, I believe, to remind us not to forget that this is not home, that we're displaced. The great Puritan Richard Baxter said this, afflictions or hardships are exceedingly useful to us to keep us from mistaking, keyword, mistaking our heavenly rest with our earthly. Without this hedge of thorns to the right and the left, we should hardly keep the way to heaven. Profound. God allows things to happen to us, difficult things to happen, so that we will be hedged in. That is, we won't get overly snug in this world and forget our true identity. And number 3, because God's people are displaced, they should then reach out to and look after others who themselves are displaced. After I had this encounter with the Sudanese family, I went to the Bible and I started reading, looking for little clues, looking for what is God's heart for displacement. What does God say about the poor and about the stranger? What does it look like, and how do I understand that? How do I engage that? And I came to two conclusions. Number one is that God would tell his people, hey, don't forget that you're strangers. He'd remind them. Even when they went into the promised land, to the land that he had promised them, he'd remind them, hey, don't forget, right, where you came from. And number two, because of that, be kind and reach out to others who are strangers. Why? Because you're a stranger. So be compassionate. Don't think you're better, entitled. You have an obligation to be my hands and feet to this world, which means looking out for, watching for those who are displaced around us. Exodus chapter 22, verse 21, God says, do not mistreat an alien, that is a stranger, someone that doesn't fit in, that's not a part of the Israelite community, an alien, or oppress him, for you were aliens in Egypt. He reminds them, don't forget. That leads me to my second main theme this morning, and that is a response to displacement. It's the so what. Okay, we know some of this, right? Hopefully it's a good reminder. But so what? What does that mean? What do we do? Well, let me suggest that we turn to Jesus and we look and see how he responded to these issues of displacement. You see, Jesus, interesting enough, when he came on the scene, what drove the Pharisees, the religious leaders, crazy was the people that were attracted to him. Tax collectors. People that used their own people for gain. A tax collector worked for Rome, and they would set up their booths along the major roads of the ancient world, of that area of Palestine, and they would collect the taxes due, and then they would charge an additional amount so they could get rich. They'd pocket money, so they were taking advantage of the system. And they were despised. And Jesus has a tax collector named Levi, we know him as Matthew, who started following him. Fishermen, women who had no status in those days. Lepers he would touch. Prostitutes. And the religious people were like, what? How does he, what? They couldn't understand it because these people were marginalized. They were pushed to the margins. They were told they're not valuable, so they're wastes of space. And Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is for such as these. I've come to preach the good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted. So let's turn to Luke chapter 19 if you want to take out your device, if you have it, or you have your Bible, or you can just listen. You can turn to Luke chapter 19 just for a moment. Luke chapter 19, this is the story of Zacchaeus. Probably familiar with it to some degree. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. Zacchaeus, who was the chief tax collector and was wealthy, was there. He wanted to see who Jesus was, and being a short man, and because of the crowd, he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So Zacchaeus came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter. Murder, maybe they thought that in their mind. They began to mutter. Hello, like, seriously? You're going to go to this guy's house? He's a scoundrel. He takes advantage of our people. Our children are hungry because of this guy. What? Like, serious? Jesus said, hey, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house for dinner. Imagine the shock. All the people saw this and began to mutter. He has gone to be the guest of a sinner, they said. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, and I think in front of everybody else, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." Jesus said to him, "Today, salvation has come to this house, because this man, too, is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man, that is Jesus, came to seek and to save what was lost." I want to note 3 things here. Number 1 is this, the look. The look. As Jesus was passing through, Zacchaeus, who you can believe felt displaced, he was despised by people. Maybe because he was short, he was overcompensating, kind of like a mafia dude, like I'm going to show people, get back at them, get my revenge, and take advantage of the system. And he was rich, but he was hated. So he climbs a tree, pretty unusual for a professional like that, climbs a tree to see Jesus. When Jesus sees it, it says this in the text, it says, he looked up. He looked up. Can you imagine the looks that Zacchaeus would get from people? Looks of hatred. Looks of revenge, scorn. And Jesus looked up at Zacchaeus. He saw him. What do people that are displaced, what do they need? What are they looking for? What are you looking for? Let's make it personal. You're looking for people who will see you. Am I right? Who look at you and accept you for who you are. They don't try to change you. They don't try to say you should do this and be like this. They value you. What do we want as human beings? We want to be known. And we want to know. We want to be loved. Right? We want to be seen for who we really are. Jesus looked up. People that are displaced, and whatever that means, feel overlooked, underappreciated, not accepted, they want to be seen. We need to be people who see people. Compassionate, empathetic, who look at people for who they are as human beings and help them see their value in Him, in the Lord. We need to see people. Number 2 is the invitation. Next, we see Jesus inviting himself over. This is extraordinary. It says, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." Now, this hit home for me a couple years ago. I live outside of Detroit, and Detroit area is known for its population of immigrants from the Middle East. In fact, it's the most concentrated Arabic-speaking population in North America. Okay? And it's all spread out, not just in one particular area. And I was visiting a guy that was from Lebanon. I connected with him through a different friend. My friend said, "Hey, this guy has no friends. He needs someone to help him with his English. Would you meet with him?" I said, "Sure, I'll call him up." So I called him up and we connected. He asked me to help him with a resume, help him understand how to pay some of his bills, basic adjustment stuff. So I'm working with him a couple months. One night I'm over at his house and he says, "Dave, tonight I will cook for you." And I said, "Excuse me?" "Yes, let's be done with our lesson." And he had me come into his kitchen and he said, "I want you to sit right here in this chair." I said, "Okay, I'm going to cook for you an authentic, traditional Lebanese meal." Now, this was extraordinary because in that culture, like many non-Western cultures, the women did all the cooking. The men wouldn't cook. That's just, we wouldn't do that. So for him to say, "I'm going to cook for you," was an extreme posture of honor, extreme honor. "I want you to sit here. I'm going to cook for you a traditional Lebanese meal." I said, "Okay, great." So he's cooking and he's talking to me. We're practicing conversational English and all that. Well, then he serves the food and it was great. It was awesome. And I'm eating, we use that word a lot. It was delicious. Okay, I'll just say that. We're having this meal, eating together, and then he stops and he looks right in my eyes. And I'll never forget this moment. It's a serious moment. And he said, "Dave, tonight, we are family." He said, "Tonight, you are my brother. You're my brother." Because when we eat with people in our culture, it means they're family, their brother, their sister. And that impacted me drastically. Our relationship changed and went the next direction. And I was able to share a lot more with him about about Christ and about God's word throughout those times we met together. And I thought about this story. Why were the people so mad? Because Jesus was in Zacchaeus' home, eating with him. Basically, what is he saying? You, Zacchaeus, belong to me. I belong to you. I accept you. I give you belonging. You are a part of me. Here's the invitation. That's why it was like, what? And they begin to talk and murmur about what is going on. How can Jesus be in this guy's house? You see, it was an extreme posture of belonging. That's the invitation. And then the response is critical. Zacchaeus was changed. He got up, probably felt for the first time valued, loved, seen, and he got up and said in front of everybody, listen, I'm going to make it right. I know I've lived a shady life. I'm going to make it right. I'm going to give back. And Jesus said, after that response, today, salvation has come to this home. You see, oftentimes, belonging is the first step, and then we start to believe. That is, our belief system will change as we feel like we belong. I didn't grow up in a Christian family. I was from a broken family, and I was struggling and searching, and I was 17 years old, and a friend of mine invited me to Young Life at my school, Christian club, Young Life. After persuading me a number of times, I finally said, okay, I'll go. And I went for 3 months before anything, I was just observing, and then I got saved at a retreat 3 months later. But what was I doing? I was watching, and you know what I felt? And this is what changed the whole direction of my life and my thoughts about God, is I felt like I belonged. People accepted me. People didn't say, oh, there's this crazy guy who does all this. They looked at me and they said, we're so glad you're here. Here's a Bible. What? I knew nothing about the Bible. Nothing. Here's a Bible. Hey, come on, hang out with us. I felt that sense of belonging. You see, oftentimes before we change our beliefs, we need to feel like we belong, that we have that invitation, that acceptance. Let me give you a couple practical steps before I end here this morning. Number one is listen. Listen. This is a great step for us to take to work with people or help people that don't feel like they belong, that feel displaced, that feel rejected. Do we not want people to listen to us? Yeah. I mean, think about it. When you're talking to someone and someone's like, yeah. And they're looking away, or they're thinking about their next whatever. You're just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to stop talking. Or you might say something, you might make up something. Yeah, did you see that green panda bear the other day? Oh yeah, you're not even listening to me, right? It's like, you could say anything and they're not listening. We want to be heard, right? We want to feel like people listen to us. Well, one of the best gifts we can give people is listen to them. Listen to their stories. I learned that working with refugees, because they came with these crazy, horrific stories of how they escaped from war and persecution. And I'm like, I can't relate. I've never had to be forced out of my country. And so I would listen, and I learned to listen and be compassionate and empathetic. Number two is saturate. I understand that's one of your key words this semester. To invite God to be part of all of our lives, a holistic approach. When I wanted to learn about what is God's heart for the poor, what is God's heart for displacement, how does the scripture say? I started to saturate myself in his word and study about God's heart and what God's people are to be when it comes to impoverishment and justice and other issues like that. I often say this to people. I say, posture precedes mission. What I mean by that is this, that what God calls you to do, what it is your life work is supposed to be, what he calls you to do, flows out of who you are, your identity in him, how God is working in your heart, how he's transforming your life, how he's changing your mind. See, mission flows out of that. We get it backwards sometimes. We're like, oh, I'm going to do this and do this and do this. And we don't immerse ourselves and saturate ourselves with God's word and God's presence and ask him, God, what can I do? How can I grow and change? How can I be more loving, more compassionate? How can I value people and see people more? Number 3 is engage. This is that step that we need to take. What does it mean to move out of ourselves and start to enter into another person's life? How can we seek to alleviate, in a sense, people that are in displacement? I heard of a business in New York City. It's a tech company in New York City where the CEO basically gives people lifetime membership. In fact, their policy is you can't get fired from this company. Your family, you cannot get fired from this company for performance issues. If you're struggling with a performance issue, we'll get you a coach and we'll work with you. Your family, the guy basically says, I would never fire my kids for performance issue. I would have no kids, right? You're like a family. This is a true live, to this day, tech company in New York City. Think about how the world operates. You perform well, you get a job, you get a bonus. You don't perform well, see ya, right? And this guy says, no, I value you, and if you're struggling, then I'm going to coach you, or we're going to have a team that coaches you and helps you. That's what we would do as parents, he says. We help our kids. We help them adjust with difficulties at school or challenges in life, right? We're going to do the same with you in this company. Awesome. Engage with people. I know churches and small groups that adopt families, whether they're inner city families or they're refugee families. They've come over here and they're displaced, and they adopt them. I remember working with some families, and they were like, "Can we go to the airport with you? Can we go to the airport with you? We want to meet them when they first come off the airplane." I said, "Sure." And they would they put together what's called a good neighbor kit, and they would have food and basic hygiene stuff, and they wanted to make the people feel welcomed. And they were there, and this big old smile on their face, and they had these signs. Sometimes a little embarrassing. I'm like, I'm not with these guys, But they were there to welcome them, and the family would get off the plane after traveling for how many hours, coming from a refugee camp, and they would see these people, and it was their first impression of America. And they would often invite them to their church, and they would come. I know a church now in the Detroit area that has opened their arms to Syrian refugees. I know there's a lot of issues right now going on. But the Syrian refugees, the only refuge, the only place they had to go in Damascus when the war broke out was the church. There's a church in Baghdad. It's still there. The pastor's still there, that opened up their church so people could live there. They could take showers there. They could have food. When people were being bombed and blown up, they could come into this church, and God protected it. And so now they're coming to Detroit. Guess where they're going? To the church. They said, hey, these people treated us so good. Our own people turned their back, our own government. So guess where they go now? They go to this Arabic-speaking church. Number 4 is remember. I only have 1 minute left, so I got to go quickly. Maybe this is the most important point of this talk, is remember that you and me, we are displaced. We don't fit in here. We don't fit into this system of the world. Therefore, we have a response to live as God's people on this earth, to do what God's called us to do, to be his hands and feet, to be who he wants us to be, more and more so who he wants us to be, and to then love others in this world. To be salt, to be light, knowing that our true home lies ahead of us. And we're longing for that place. One day there will be ultimate placement. Until then, we have to walk by faith. So my final challenge is this. What faith step is God asking you to take? Let's make it personal. What is the faith step? Maybe it's something to do with your future, a relationship. You're uncertain about something. What is the faith step? Because that's the ultimate response to feeling displaced. It's take a step of faith. We walk by faith and not by sight. Think about that. What is it that God is asking you to trust in him with? You guys have been awesome. I encourage you to come up to my book table. I've got some resources there. You can sign up for my email list, learn more about what I do. Would love to meet you. If you have a few minutes before class or you don't have class, come and see me.